they were contrasting it with the Dutch disease, which emerged in Norway, I think, or Holland, sorry, back in the 70s, where they had a finite level of oil resources. It led to an exploitation of those resources, an attraction of capital and labour to that sector, a hollowing out of the rest of the economy, and then once the finite resources declined, they had lost a part of their industrial base. In Australia, we're potentially facing a different situation in terms of a longer-lived resources boom, a much deeper resource stockpile, and a much greater long-lived demand-side feature. The tourism investment report that I talked about earlier on, we released on Wednesday, showed in part that the tourism industry's investment performance has been pretty poor over recent times. We've failed to attract the level of investment we need to. We're just rebuilding capital stock. We're not renewing or building further capital stock. So it's just another, in contrast to the mining sector, which is attracting a vast array of capital, it's just a very difficult situation for the industry. In January this year, Tourism Research Australia released its productivity report on the tourism industry, and this just compared tourism industry productivity to all the rest of the economy. And I think you can see from those figures that generally the tourism industry productivity performance hasn't been as high as other sectors. Now, it's very difficult for the tourism industry to compete with productivity levels in very high capital intensive industries such as the mining sector. We're a labour-intensive industry, but it does mean that the lower levels of productivity lead into potentially lower levels of investment and lower levels of profitability, which feed a cycle where it's very difficult for business to renew their product and rebuild their product and cater for emerging market demands. As I said, there is a structural change going in the Australian economy at the moment. But to echo the thoughts of Professor Arndt before, we're going to see a structural change in the visitors to Australia too. There's going to be an increasing focus on sophistication in our visitors, and I think Nell Anderson might touch on this a little bit in her presentation as well, that people are going to demand a different experience. The State of the Industry report that we released last year showed that one of the sectors of the Australian tourism industry that's suffering the most is the package market. So it's the commoditised end of the tourism market. It's the higher end niche experiences are coping with the change much more effectively. And I think you can see from recent media reports that certainly in the Australian media, that Chinese visitors to Australia are demanding a more sophisticated experience, and they're going to continue to do that as we see the level of wealth in the Chinese community increase, but also through more generally a lot of our emerging markets, you'll see a level of sophistication. I was recently at a United Nations World Tourism Organisation. It was the Regional Commission for South Asia and East Asia, and all of the delegates around the table were noting that they'd seen increases in Chinese visitation. The Chinese delegate pointed out the fact that countries can't rest on their laurels. They're going to have to provide a quality experience. The demands by international visitors from China are going to increase. They're going to want better quality, a more sophisticated product into the future. So we can't rest on what we've got in our product offering at the moment. In terms of Australia, we've seen strong growth in international arrivals from China. Last year, China became our most valuable export market, something that's been quite a big turnaround from our traditional markets over time. Policy settings have been broadly supportive of the growth in the Chinese inbound arrivals. We've had the approved destination status scheme, which has supported Chinese visitation. We've had a focus on air capacity, lifting air capacity, with recent air services negotiations. There's a focus on quality, so the presentation of a quality product by Australia to the Chinese market and internationally, but also a focus on strategic marketing to look at what we need to do for China as well. And of course the education sector has been a very important part of the Australian tourism offering as well, so attracting a large number of people, and people who tend to be long stayers and as a result quite valuable for the Australian tourism industry. We expect to see a continuation of this trend, but of course, noting my comments before, this will have to be built on providing a quality experience, providing the types of product, the service level, the quality that people from China and the rest of the world will really demand. So you can see from those numbers that there are potentially significant growth over time, but we've got to work hard to capture that. We've got a challenging environment facing us from investment and labour attraction for the industry. So the industry is going to have to work quite hard to attract all the product mix that it needs to develop, to the investment it needs, and the labour resources that it will need to capitalise on that. In terms of policy responses, in late 2009, the Minister for Tourism released what is called the National Long-Term Tourism Strategy. And this is really a long-term vision for the industry. It's trying to reposition the Australian tourism industry in the economic policy debate. Typically in Australia, we've had a well-developed demand-side stimulation policy. We've got Tourism Australia, which handles by and large our international marketing campaign. We've got state and territory tourism organisations which contribute to the marketing campaign and market from their perspectives as well. Demand-side management has been particularly a strength for Australia over a long period of time. The supply-side issues confronting the industry have typically have not attracted the same level of policy attention as demand-side. And it's been very hard for policymakers, particularly in central government, to see the value of tourism beyond looking at a marketing campaign. And the tourism strategy is really about trying to start work on those fundamental issues. What do we do about labour? What do we do about investment? How do we develop quality product experiences? How do we get the message to consumers who are becoming increasingly digitally savvy? How do we get increased access and the transport linkages which are going to be sympathetic to growing our market? How do we bring all of these together to reposition the tourism industry and to attract the attention of key policymakers within government and key decision makers in industry to start making those transitions that the industry needs to have? The tourism strategy, National Long-Term Tourism Strategy, is a collaborative work. It was released by the Federal Minister for Tourism, but it's endorsed by each and every state and territory tourism minister. So it is a collaborative piece of work. There are 9 working groups established to implement the strategy. By and large, those groups are headed up by a state or territory. So it is really about building those linkages, not only at a Commonwealth level, but at a state and territory level as well, to affect the policy change that we need to have. But again, it just echoes some of the comments that I'd made before. We've got there to maximise China inbound tourism markets requires competitive product, increased investment, targeted marketing, adequate supply of labour, appropriate skills. That goes for any market, whether it's an international market or a domestic market. And all of that requires robust research so that we understand the facts, we can bring to bear the appropriate analysis to support the tourism industry. The Tourism Research Advisory Board was one of the 9 working groups established under the strategy and is really trying to build the research base for the industry. Tourism Research Australia, the department cannot do all of the research required for the tourism industry. It is really trying to build a collaborative base, trying to work in partnership with the university sector, in partnership with industry, to understand what are the research needs for the tourism industry. What can we each collaborate on? What can we do that aligns with trying to achieve the objectives that we have set ourselves? To examine where are the gaps, how we work to build a program which is going to cover those gaps. Work out what's already done. Sometimes with tourism, it's the decision makers aren't necessarily well connected. So it's about building those linkages so we actually understand where there may be research already done which can act in that space. But it's also about disseminating that research. Tourism is a very diverse industry. I think it's 90-odd% of the Australian tourism industry is small or medium-sized enterprises. So it's about getting the types of research we need into the hands of the right people. And it's a big challenge. We in central government feel that it's very difficult to get to connect all stakeholders, but it's something that we're very conscious of with the work that we're doing. Through the Research Advisory Board, we've developed what is called the National Tourism Research Agenda. And it's really that is the vehicle through which we're trying to understand what is taking place, who are the appropriate research bodies that we can leverage off, what are the gaps within the research interests at the moment. And notionally, we've thought of 4 themes that can support that work. Current market dynamics, which is really a summing up where the industry is at now. Emerging trends, looking at what the industry is going to have to understand and the challenges and opportunities it's going to have to meet over time. Productive capacity. So this is really about, within a constrained economy, how you make the most of every resource that you've got available to you so you can lift your productivity, your profitability, your investment rates, be a more attractive workplace for your labour force. And dissemination. So we get this information into the hands of small operators, into larger operators, into central policymakers, into the academic research community, so we can start moving everything in the same direction. TRA helps to do that, providing the secretariat to the board, and we will actively be trying to connect with stakeholders in the research community and trying to build collaborative links, not only within Australia but hopefully internationally as well, where we can build on that program. Thank you for your attention, and just to reiterate, whilst the industry I think has a range of challenges facing it, there are also some opportunities, very positive opportunities for the Australian tourism industry. We are well positioned in a resource sense. We're well positioned to supply our near neighbours with resources. We're also well positioned to supply a growing region with tourism services as well. So there are good reasons to feel optimistic. But the challenge is to try and capitalise on those opportunities through creative policy, the right types of marketing, and the right research supporting all of that. Thank you.